After my sister's funeral, my dad threw a wooden box into the river. What was inside left me shaking. My name is Chloe Reynolds. I'm 28 years old. I'm a teacher, a daughter, a sister. But more than anything, I am a witness to what my family did when they thought no one was watching. The day we buried my sister, my father walked to the river, a small wooden box in his hands. He let the current take it. And from the water, I heard a cry. Before I tell you how everything flipped, like and subscribe, and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. Rain fell on the day we buried my sister Lily. It wasn't a gentle, sad rain. It was a hard, angry storm that soaked through my black coat and chilled me to the bone. The sky was the color of a bruise. It felt like the world was trying to wash something away, something it couldn't stand to look at anymore. Our family stood under a large black umbrella, a perfect picture of grief for the few onlookers who had braved the weather. But I knew it was a lie. We weren't a family of grief. We were a family of control. Our last name, Reynolds, was a brand in our small town. It meant success, power, and reputation. My father, Thomas Reynolds, had built a construction empire from nothing. He built bridges and buildings, but he ruled our home with the same cold iron and concrete. Appearances were everything. Truth was a liability. Love was conditional. After the last prayer was said, after the clods of wet earth were thrown onto the casket, people started to leave. Their murmurs of "I'm so sorry for your loss" felt hollow. They didn't know our loss. They didn't know my sister. They only knew the version of her my parents allowed the world to see. I stayed by the grave, unable to move. The white roses my mother had insisted on were already beaten down by the rain. I watched my father. He stood tall, his shoulders straight, his face a mask of stone. He hadn't shed a single tear. He just looked out past the graveyard, toward the roaring river that bordered the old cemetery. Then he did something strange. He handed the large umbrella to my mother and started walking away from the manicured gravel path. He walked toward the riverbank, his expensive shoes sinking into the mud. My mother, Catherine Reynolds, didn't call out to him. She just clutched the handle of the umbrella, her knuckles white. Her pearls, always perfectly placed, seemed to choke her. She knew. I could see it in her eyes. She knew what he was doing, and her silence was her consent. He was carrying something. A small, simple wooden box wrapped in a piece of white cloth. It looked like something you would bury a small pet in. It was plain, unvarnished. It didn't fit with my father's world of polished mahogany and gold-plated fixtures. He held it carefully, almost formally, as he made his way through the wet grass to the edge of the river. The water was high and brown, churning with debris from the storm. He knelt down. For a moment, he just looked at the box. I couldn't see his face, only the rigid line of his back. He unwrapped the cloth slowly, letting it fall into the mud. Then he placed the wooden box on the surface of the water. He didn't throw it. He didn't push it. He just set it down and let the current catch it. The box bobbed once, twice, and then the river started to pull it away, carrying it toward the rapids downstream. My father stood up, wiped his hands on his trousers as if he had just finished a dirty job, and turned to walk back. That's when I heard it. A sound. Small and thin, almost lost in the roar of the rain and the river. It was a cry, a weak, broken human cry. It wasn't the wind. It wasn't a bird. I had spent the last 6 years teaching first grade. I knew the sound of a child. This was smaller, newer. It was the sound of a baby. My blood ran cold. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic, trapped bird. I looked at my mother. Her face was pale, her eyes wide with something that looked like terror. She saw that I had heard it. She gave a tiny, almost imperceptible shake of her head. "Stay silent. Don't make a scene. Don't ruin this." That's what her look always said, but I couldn't. Not this time. The sound came again, fainter now as the box drifted further away. "What was that?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. My father was walking back toward us. He didn't look at me. "It's nothing, Chloe, just the wind. Let's go home." His voice was too calm, too final. It was the voice he used to close a business deal, not to comfort a grieving daughter. I looked back at the river. The box was snagged in some reeds near the bank, about 50 yards downstream. It was stuck, tilting precariously in the churning water. The crying had stopped. I didn't think. "I just ran, Chloe!" My father's voice boomed behind me. It was a command, not a plea. "Stop right now!" I ignored him. I ran through the mud, my heels sinking, my nice black dress tearing on a branch. The rain plastered my hair to my face. I could hear my own ragged breaths, the frantic beat of my heart in my ears. The only thing in the world was that box. I had to get to it. My lungs burned. My ankles twisted in the uneven, muddy ground. I finally reached the spot where the box was caught. It was half submerged, the cheap wood already dark with water. I waded into the freezing river up to my knees, the current pulling at my legs. I didn't care. I grabbed the box. It was heavier than I expected. Water streamed from its sides. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold it. I stumbled back to the bank and fell to my knees in the mud. The lid wasn't nailed shut, just a simple clasp. It was swollen with water and stuck fast. I fumbled in my purse, my fingers numb and clumsy. My car key. I jammed it into the crack and pried. The wood splintered. The lid popped open with a sick, soft sound. The world stopped. The rain, the river, my own breathing, it all went silent. Inside, nestled in the same white cloth my father had unwrapped, was a baby. A newborn baby. Her skin was a terrifying shade of blue. Her tiny lips were parted. Her eyes were closed. She was so small, so impossibly small. For a second, a horrible, soul-crushing second, I thought she was dead. Then her little chest gave a tiny, fluttering shudder. A weak, shallow breath. She was alive. Around her tiny, wrinkled wrist was a plastic hospital bracelet. I leaned closer, my tears mixing with the rain on my face. The words were printed in stark black letters. I read them once, twice, a third time, but my mind refused to understand. Baby girl, Lily Reynolds. Lily's baby. My sister who was dead. My sister, who they said died of complications. This was the complication. This was the secret. This was the thing my father had to fix quietly. He hadn't just tried to dispose of a secret. He had tried to murder his own grandchild. I looked up from the box, a scream building in my throat, a scream of pure animal horror. And standing there just a few feet away was my father. His perfect suit was now splattered with mud. His face was unreadable. He had come for the evidence. He had come to finish the job, but he was too late. I had found her, and I was never, ever going to let her go. To understand why my father would throw a living child into a river, you have to understand my family. From the outside, we were perfect. We lived in the biggest house on the hill, the one with the white columns and the perfectly manicured lawn. My father, Thomas Reynolds, was the man everyone respected and feared. He was a king in our town, and our family was his kingdom. My mother, Catherine, was his queen. She was beautiful, elegant, and her main job was to make sure the kingdom always looked perfect. She ran charity boards, hosted political fundraisers, and made sure there were never any cracks in the facade. And then there was Lily and me. We were the princesses, but we were very different kinds of princesses. I was the good one. I did what I was told. I got good grades, went to a good college, and came back home to teach at the local elementary school. I was quiet, dependable, and I never made waves. I was the beige wallpaper against which the rest of my family could shine. Lily was the masterpiece. She was fire and light. She was wild and free, with a laugh that could make you forget all your troubles. She didn't care about our family's image or my father's reputation. She painted. She painted sunsets on her worn-out jeans. She painted murals on her bedroom walls. She painted the truth she saw in people's eyes. She saw the world in vibrant colors, while my parents only saw it in black and white, profit and loss. My father didn't understand her art. He called it a messy hobby. He wanted her to go to law school, to marry a man from a family as powerful as ours. He wanted to merge empires. But Lily didn't want an empire. She just wanted a life that was her own. And then she found Jake Harper. Jake was everything my father hated. He was a mechanic. He had grease permanently etched into the lines of his hands. He didn't come from money. His father was a plumber, his mother a waitress. He drove a beat-up truck and wore faded t-shirts. But he had the kindest eyes I had ever seen. And when he looked at Lily, it was like he was looking at the sun. He didn't try to change her or tame her. He loved her exactly as she was. They fell in love during a hot, humid summer. Lily would come home late, smelling of motor oil and happiness, her eyes sparkling. She was more alive than I had ever seen her. Of course, my parents saw it as a disaster. "He's trash, Lily," my father said one night at the dinner table. It was a perfectly set table with polished silver and crystal glasses. It always felt like a stage, and we were all actors playing our parts. "His name is Jake, Dad," Lily said, her voice calm but firm. "And he's a good person. A good person doesn't drag a Reynolds girl into a garage," my father shot back, cutting his steak with precise, angry movements. My mother jumped in, her voice smooth and placating. "Darling, your father just means you have so much potential. You're throwing your future away on this boy." "I'm not throwing it away," Lily said, looking from my father to my mother. "I'm choosing it. I'm choosing to be happy." "Don't you want me to be happy, Slants?" That was always their answer when they didn't know how to control the conversation. My father simply stared at her, his jaw tight. Happiness wasn't part of the family business plan. I stayed quiet. I always stayed quiet. I ate my food and wished I could disappear. Part of me was terrified for Lily. The other part was jealous. She was so brave. She was fighting for her own life. I was just a spectator in mine. The fighting got worse over the next few months. There were slammed doors and shouted words that echoed through our big, empty house. My father threatened to cut her off. My mother cried, but her tears were for the family's reputation, not for her daughter's heart. Then, one evening, Lily told them she was pregnant. We were in my father's study. It was a room filled with dark wood and the smell of leather and power. Lily stood in the middle of the room, her hand resting on her still flat stomach. Jake was supposed to be with her, but my father had forbidden him from setting foot on the property. So Lily stood alone. She looked so small in that big, intimidating room, but her voice was strong. "I'm pregnant," she said, "and I'm going to marry Jake. We're going to have this baby." My mother let out a small, horrified gasp and sank into a leather armchair. She put her hand to her forehead as if she were about to faint. My father didn't move. He just sat behind his massive desk, his face unreadable. He steepled his fingers and looked at Lily for a long, cold moment. I held my breath, waiting for the explosion, but it didn't come. Instead, he said one sentence, his voice low and chillingly calm. A sentence that would haunt me forever. "We'll fix this quietly." It wasn't a promise of help. It was a threat. It was the sound of a problem being identified and a solution being planned. In my father's world, problems weren't solved with love or compassion. They were eliminated. Lily's face fell. The bravery drained out of her. For the first time, she looked scared. "What does that mean?" she asked. "It means you will do as you are told," my father said, his voice like ice. "This family will not be brought down by a scandal. This mistake will not see the light of day." I wanted to scream. I wanted to run to Lily and stand with her, but I was frozen in my chair, trapped by a lifetime of fear and obedience. I just sat there, silent, as my father destroyed my sister's hope with a few quiet words. A week later, Lily was gone. My parents told everyone there were complications with the pregnancy, a sudden tragic medical issue. They said she had been rushed to a private clinic out of state. Then, a few days after that, they told us she hadn't made it. It all happened so fast. There was no time to visit, no time to say goodbye. It was all handled, cleanly, efficiently, quietly. The word complications never felt right. It felt like a curtain pulled over a dark stage. It was a lie, a neat and tidy word to cover up something messy and horrible. Jake was destroyed. He came to our house begging to know what happened, but my father had him removed for trespassing. He called me, his voice broken with sobs. "What happened, Chloe? What did they do?" "I don't know," I whispered, and it was the truth. I didn't know the details, but I knew in my gut that my father's fix had gone terribly, horribly wrong. Now, kneeling in the mud by the river, holding my sister's living, breathing child in my arms, I finally understood what he meant. He hadn't just fixed the problem of Lily's pregnancy. He had tried to erase it completely. He had taken the baby, my niece, and discarded her like a piece of trash. He thought the river would wash away his sin, leaving the Reynolds family name clean and perfect once more. The funeral felt like a performance. Every detail was perfectly managed, just like everything else in my parents' lives. The church was filled with enormous bouquets of white roses, their scent so strong it was suffocating. The guests were a who's who of our town's elite, business partners, politicians, the heads of the boards my mother sat on. They moved through the church in their expensive dark suits and elegant black dresses, their faces set in masks of somber respect. I stood in the receiving line between my mother and father, a ghost in a black dress. People would come to me, take my hand in their soft, manicured ones and whisper their scripted condolences. "I'm so sorry, Chloe. She was such a vibrant girl. A terrible tragedy. So young. Your parents are so strong. An inspiration." Their words were like stones, smooth and meaningless. They didn't know Lily. They knew the idea of her, the rebellious daughter of the great Thomas Reynolds. They didn't know the way she snorted when she laughed too hard, or how she loved the smell of old books, or the fierce, protective way she loved the people she cared about. These people were mourning the disruption to the social order, not the loss of a beautiful, irreplaceable soul. My mother's hand trembled as she shook hands with the mayor's wife, but it wasn't from grief. It was from the strain of holding her performance together. She was terrified of a misstep, a crack in the facade that would lead to gossip. I watched her scan the crowd, her eyes sharp, making sure everyone saw her perfect, tragic sorrow. My father was a statue. He accepted condolences with a firm nod, his expression grim and dignified. He didn't cry. He just stood there, the pillar of strength. But his strength wasn't born of resilience. It was forged from cold, hard pride. During the service, as the minister spoke about Lily joining the angels, my father leaned over and whispered to my mother. I was close enough to hear him. He didn't say, "I miss her so much." He said, "Make sure you tell Stephen from the Tribune no statements to the press." I felt a wave of nausea. My sister was in a casket at the front of the church, and my father was managing public relations. I felt completely and utterly alone, like I was the only person in the entire building who was actually grieving. I wasn't just mourning Lily. I was mourning the family I wished we could have been. A family where a new baby was a cause for joy, not a scandal to be erased. A family where love was more important than a last name. Sitting in the hard wooden pew, I felt the silence of my family pressing in on me. It was a physical weight. It was the silence of years of things left unsaid, of truths buried under layers of polite fiction. It was the silence that allowed my father to believe he had the right to fix my sister's life. It was the silence that killed her. I didn't know how she died, not really, but I knew in my heart that this silence, this obsession with control and image, was the weapon. The graveside service was even worse. The cold rain was a relief in a way. It felt real, honest, unlike the plastic emotions of the people around me. As they lowered Lily's casket into the ground, I thought my knees would buckle. This was it. This was the final act of the play. The curtain was coming down on Lily's life, and my parents had written the script. Then my father walked to the river with that box. Watching him, a horrifying clarity washed over me. The vague suspicions, the gnawing unease I'd felt for the past week, it all clicked into place. The complications, the rush to a private, faraway clinic, the refusal to let anyone, even Jake, see her. They hadn't just been controlling the situation. They had been staging a cover-up. Lily had the baby. She must have. And they took the baby from her. What did they tell her? Did they tell her the baby died? Was that lie the thing that broke her heart and made her give up? Or was it something even worse? The questions swirled in my head, making me feel dizzy. When I heard that faint cry from the river, it was like a key turning in a lock. It unlocked the entire monstrous truth. My father wasn't just a cold, controlling man. He was a monster. And my mother, with her silent complicity, was just as monstrous. As I knelt in the mud, staring at the tiny blue-tinged face of my niece, the full weight of my victimization crashed down on me. I wasn't just a grieving sister. I was a victim of the same cold, brutal system that had swallowed Lily whole. My entire life had been defined by their rules, their expectations, their silence. I had been taught to be quiet, to be good, to never question. I had been groomed to be a willing participant in their lies. My silence, my obedience had made me an accomplice. The baby in my arms was Lily's last act of rebellion. She was the truth that refused to be drowned. And in that moment, I knew I had a choice. I could hand her over to my father and let him finish what he started. I could retreat back into the suffocating silence he demanded. Or I could finally, for the first time in my life, scream. I clutched the baby to my chest, her small cold body a fragile anchor in the storm of my horror. I would not be silent. Not anymore. For Lily, for this tiny innocent child. And for myself, the performance was over. The rain was coming down harder now, soaking the thin white cloth the baby was wrapped in. I pulled open my black coat and tucked her inside against my body, trying to shield her from the wind and give her some of my warmth. Her little body was so cold. I whispered to her, my voice shaking, saying anything to fill the terrible silence. Hey, it's okay. It's okay, little one. I've got you. I've got you. Her tiny chest fluttered against mine. It was a weak, shallow movement, but it was steady. She was a fighter. She was Lily's daughter. When I looked up, my father was standing there. He was just a few feet away, a dark silhouette against the gray sky. The mud was splattered up his polished shoes and the cuffs of his expensive trousers. His face was like a stone carving, hard and empty of all emotion. He didn't look at the baby. He looked at me. Give her to me, Chloe. His voice was low, calm, and utterly terrifying. It was the voice of a man who had never been disobeyed. I scrambled backwards in the mud, clutching the baby so tightly I was afraid I would hurt her. My heart was a drum beating a rhythm of pure fear. No, I gasped. You threw her in the river. I said the words, the most horrible words I had ever spoken, but he didn't even flinch. There was no shame in his eyes, no remorse, only annoyance, as if I were a stubborn child refusing to come inside for dinner. You don't understand what you're doing, he said, taking a step closer. Then explain it to me, I challenged, my voice rising, cracking with hysteria. Explain why you tried to kill your own grandchild. Don't be dramatic, he snapped, his voice finally showing a flicker of anger. It was a mistake, a problem. It had to be dealt with. She's not a problem. She's a baby. She's Lily's baby. I was screaming now, the sound raw and ugly in the open air. He took another step. His eyes were cold, calculating. You can't raise her, Chloe. Think about it. She's a scandal. She will ruin everything. She will ruin your life. She's the living proof of Lily's mistake. I looked down at the tiny face nestled against my chest. Her skin was starting to look a little less blue, a little more pink. A mistake? This perfect tiny human? No, she wasn't the mistake. My family was. I staggered to my feet, my legs shaking. I stepped back again, moving away from him toward the gravel path. She's Lily's daughter, I repeated, the words feeling like the only truth left in the world. A muscle twitched in his jaw. For the first time, his cold composure cracked, and I saw the rage beneath. She is the end of everything I have built, he finally roared, his voice echoing across the empty cemetery. My reputation, our family's name, decades of work, all destroyed by a stupid girl and her trashy boyfriend. His words hit me like a physical blow. He wasn't grieving his daughter. He was angry at her for inconveniencing him. He was furious that her life and her death hadn't followed his plan. Something inside me broke. The fear, the years of obedience, it all shattered, and all that was left was a cold, hard certainty. I looked him straight in the eye. Then maybe you built the wrong thing, I said, and I ran. I ran as fast as I could, my coat flapping behind me, the precious bundle held tight against my chest. I didn't look back. I didn't want to see his face. I could hear him yelling my name, but his voice was drowned out by the sound of my own blood pounding in my ears. The weight of what I knew was crushing. It was a physical thing, a heavy stone in my gut. I was the only one who knew the truth. My mother knew, but her silence was a wall I could never break through. She had chosen her side. I was utterly and completely alone. I fumbled for my car keys, my hands shaking so violently it took 3 tries to unlock the door. I laid the baby gently on the passenger seat, wrapping her in my coat and a spare blanket from the trunk. I turned the heat on full blast. Her eyes were still closed, but she made a tiny, mewling sound. As I pulled out of the cemetery, my tires spinning in the mud, I saw my father standing by the gate. He wasn't running after me. He was just watching, his face a thundercloud. He was probably already planning his next move, calculating how to control this new, unexpected variable. Me. Driving away from that graveyard, I felt like I was driving away from my entire life. The big house on the hill, the family dinners, the carefully constructed lies, it was all in my rearview mirror. Ahead of me was a dark road, a raging storm, and a tiny, fragile life that depended entirely on me. I was terrified. But for the first time, I was also free. I was no longer a silent victim. I was a witness, and I had the evidence right there in the passenger seat next to me. The drive to the hospital was a blur of rain-streaked headlights and terror. I had one hand on the steering wheel, my knuckles white, and my other arm stretched across the passenger seat, resting protectively on the small bundle that was my niece. The highway was a river of black asphalt and red taillights. Every car that got too close felt like a threat. I kept checking my rearview mirror, half expecting to see my father's black sedan tailing me, but the road behind me was empty. My mind was racing, a chaotic storm of thoughts. What if she stops breathing? What do I tell the hospital? How do I explain a newborn baby I found in a river? The truth sounded insane, like something from a twisted movie. My father tried to drown my dead sister's baby on the day of her funeral. Who would believe me? They'd think I was crazy, that I was the one who had done something wrong. The baby started to cry again. It wasn't a loud, healthy cry. It was a weak, pathetic sound like a kitten's mew. It tore through me, a sound of pure, helpless suffering. It's okay, I sobbed, my tears mixing with the rain on the windshield. Please be okay. I'm getting you help. Just hold on. Please hold on. I talked to her the whole way. I told her about her mother. I told her how Lily loved to paint, how she had a laugh that could fill a room, how brave she was. I promised her she would be safe. I promised her she would be loved. I made promises I had no idea how I would keep, but I had to say them. I had to believe them. I saw the blue and white sign for St. Vincent's Hospital and swerved into the emergency entrance, slamming on the brakes under the covered awning. I didn't even turn the car off. I just grabbed the baby, wrapped her tightly in the blanket, and ran through the automatic doors. The emergency room was a chaotic whirl of bright lights, beeping machines, and stressed faces. I must have looked like a madwoman, soaked to the skin, covered in mud, clutching a tiny bundle and screaming for help. Please. My baby! She's not breathing right! She's cold! I yelled to the first person I saw in scrubs. Immediately, the chaos focused on me. A nurse. A calm, middle-aged woman with steady eyes and a no-nonsense expression rushed toward me. "Right here, honey. Let me see." She took the baby from my arms with practiced ease. Her face went from professional calm to urgent concern in a split second. "She's hypothermic. Get me a pediatric crash cart and Dr. Evans now," she shouted to another nurse. People were moving all around me, a whirlwind of efficient action. They whisked the baby away, placing her on a gurney and surrounding her with equipment. I stood there, dripping on the linoleum floor, my empty arms feeling cold and useless. I had gotten her here. I had done my part. Now she was in their hands. The first nurse came back to me, her pen poised over a clipboard. "We need some information. What happened? What's her name?" My mind went blank. She didn't have a name. She was just baby girl Lily Reynolds. A label on a hospital bracelet, an item to be disposed of. She deserved more than that. She deserved a name that meant something. I thought of what she was. A tiny flicker of life that had survived the most impossible odds. An unearned, undeserved gift. "Grace," I whispered, the name coming to me out of nowhere. "Her name is Grace." "Okay, Grace," the nurse said, writing it down. "And how old is she?" "I don't know. A few hours, a day? I just found her." The lie felt clumsy on my tongue, but the truth was too dangerous. "You just found her? Where?" "By the river," I mumbled, looking down at my muddy shoes. She was abandoned. It was a half-truth. She was abandoned, but I knew by whom. The nurse gave me a long, searching look, but the alarm for a patient in the next bay went off, and she was pulled away. "A social worker will be here to talk to you," she said over her shoulder. I was led to a small, quiet waiting room. Someone gave me a dry blanket and a cup of hot tea that I held with shaking hands, not drinking. I sat there for hours. The adrenaline that had fueled my flight from the cemetery drained away, leaving a deep, bone-aching exhaustion in its place. I replayed the day's events over and over in my head. The funeral, my father's cold face, the walk to the river, the tiny cry, the horrible discovery. It felt like a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. I wasn't just a witness anymore. By giving her a name, by bringing her here, I had become her protector. I had drawn a line in the sand. My father was on one side, and Grace and I were on the other. This wasn't just about saving a baby. It was about choosing a side between good and evil, and I had just discovered that the monster of the story was my own father. Finally, a doctor came into the room. He was young, with tired eyes. He sat down across from me. "Chloe?" he asked, looking at the chart. I must have given my name at some point. I didn't remember. I just nodded. "I'm Dr. Evans. We've been working on Grace. She was severely hypothermic, and she had taken in some water, but her vitals are stabilizing. She's a tough little girl." A wave of relief so powerful it almost made me sick washed over me. "She's going to be okay?" "We're cautiously optimistic," he said. "She's in the NICU now. We'll have to monitor her closely for the next few days. But she's breathing on her own. You got her here just in time." He paused, looking at me with a mixture of professional curiosity and human kindness. "You saved her life. I should have felt like a hero, but I didn't. I felt like a fraud. I hadn't just saved a life. I had declared war on my own family. And I knew with a chilling certainty that my father was not a man who accepted defeat. The battle for Grace had only just begun. The first night in the hospital was the longest night of my life. I didn't sleep. I couldn't. I sat in a hard plastic chair beside Grace's incubator in the neonatal intensive care unit, the NICU. The room was kept dim, a quiet, sacred space filled with the soft, rhythmic beeping of machines that were keeping tiny, fragile humans alive. Each beep was a heartbeat, a breath, a promise of another second of life. Grace lay inside her clear plastic box, looking impossibly small amidst a tangle of thin wires and tubes. A tiny mask was taped to her face, feeding her oxygen. A sensor on her little foot glowed with a soft red light. I watched the gentle rise and fall of her chest, a miracle in miniature. Her skin was pink now, a healthy, beautiful pink. Her tiny fists were clenched, as if she were already fighting. The nurses moved with a quiet, efficient grace, their voices low and soothing. They were angels in comfortable shoes. They told me I should get some rest, that they would watch over her, but I couldn't leave. I felt like if I took my eyes off her for a second, she would disappear. I was her only link to her mother, her only protector in this world. The sun came up, casting a pale, watery light through the large hospital windows. The morning brought with it the normal hospital sounds, the clatter of breakfast trays in the hallway, the murmur of doctors on their rounds. It all felt so normal, so routine, which made the horror of the previous day feel even more surreal. Did the rest of the world not know that a man had tried to throw away a life? Did they not feel the ground shake beneath them? I must have drifted off for a few minutes. My head slumped against the hard plastic of the incubator, because a nurse's gentle touch on my shoulder startled me awake. "Chloe," she said softly, "you have a visitor. Your father is here." My blood ran cold. The quiet peace of the NICU was shattered. It felt like a wolf had just walked into a nursery. I stood up, my body stiff and aching. I walked to the entrance of the unit, my heart pounding a frantic, terrified rhythm against my ribs. He was standing there, just outside the double doors, talking to a nurse. He looked exactly as he always did, perfect. His suit was immaculate. His hair was perfectly combed. His face was a calm, concerned mask. He looked like a worried grandfather, a pillar of the community checking on a sick relative. The nurse was nodding sympathetically, completely taken in by his performance. The sight of it made me sick. When he saw me, he ended his conversation and walked toward me. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. His power was in his presence, in the quiet, unshakable certainty that the world would bend to his will. "Chloe," he said, his voice low and reasonable. "We need to talk." "There's nothing to talk about," I said, my voice barely a whisper. I crossed my arms over my chest, trying to create a physical barrier between us. "Don't be foolish," he said, his eyes scanning the unit behind me, a flicker of distaste crossing his face. "You're overwrought. You've just lost your sister. Your grief is making you irrational." He was already building his story, the narrative that would protect him. I was the hysterical, grieving daughter. He was the calm, rational father trying to manage a difficult situation. "I'm not irrational," I said, my voice growing stronger. "I know what I saw." "You saw a tragic accident," he corrected me, his voice still smooth as silk. I was distraught. I didn't know what was in the box. I was just trying to dispose of a painful memory. The lie was so audacious, so complete, that it stole my breath. He could say it with a straight face, believing that his word, the word of Thomas Reynolds, would be enough to erase the truth. "A painful memory that was crying, Dad?" I shot back. "A memory that had a hospital bracelet with Lily's name on it?" His eyes hardened. The mask of concern slipped, revealing the cold steel beneath. "This is not a viable path, Chloe. Think about what you are doing. You bring this child into our lives, and you create a scandal that will follow us forever. It will follow you forever. No one will understand. Your job, your reputation, everything will be ruined. You are destroying this family." "No, Dad," I said, and the words came out with a clarity that surprised me. I looked past him, through the glass, at the tiny baby fighting for her life in a plastic box. "You destroyed this family when you chose your reputation over your daughter. You destroyed it when you threw your granddaughter into a river." I said the words, and I didn't flinch. For the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid of his anger. He took a step closer, his body radiating a quiet menace. "I will not let you do this," he whispered, his voice a low growl. "I will not let you and that mechanic's bastard child tear down everything I have built. I forbid it." I almost laughed. "Forbid it?" He thought he could still command me, like a child who had misbehaved. He had no idea who I was anymore. The quiet, obedient daughter he had raised was gone. She had died yesterday in the mud, by the river. "She has a name," I said, my voice ringing with a strength I didn't know I possessed. "Her name is Grace." That's when he lost control. The calm, calculated mask shattered completely, and raw, ugly rage contorted his features. He moved past me, pushing me aside as if I were a piece of furniture, and strode toward Grace's incubator. "I will handle this," he snarled, reaching for the latch on the incubator door. A primal scream of terror and rage ripped from my throat. "No!" I threw myself in front of him, planting my feet between him and the incubator. He was bigger, stronger, but I was fueled by a ferocity I had never felt before. I was a mother bear protecting her cub. "Get out of my way, Chloe!" he seethed, grabbing my arm. His grip was like iron. Pain shot up my arm, but I didn't back down. I looked him straight in his cold, merciless eyes. The final weapon, the only one he would understand, formed on my lips. "Touch her," I said, my voice deadly quiet. "Touch that incubator again, and I swear to God I will walk out of this hospital and I will not stop talking. I will go to the police. I will go to the newspapers. I will go to every single one of your business partners and your country club friends, and I will tell them exactly what you did. I will tell them how you threw a living, breathing baby into the river on the day you buried her mother." I watched the words hit him. I saw the calculation in his eyes. He wasn't afraid of me. He wasn't afraid of morality or the law, not really. He believed he was above all that. But he was terrified of exposure. He was terrified of having his perfect image shattered, of being seen for the monster he truly was. The shame, the gossip, the scandal, that was the language he understood. He dropped my arm as if it were on fire. He looked at me, his eyes filled with a hatred so pure it was breathtaking. He truly saw me for the first time, not as his quiet daughter, but as his enemy. He straightened his suit jacket, pulling the mask of composure back over his face, but it didn't fit right anymore. It was cracked, damaged. "You have no idea what you've just done," he said, his voice dripping with venom. "Yes, I do," I replied, my body still trembling, but my voice steady. "I just saved her." Again, he turned without another word and walked away. I watched him go, his footsteps echoing down the sterile hospital corridor. When he was gone, my legs gave out and I sank to the floor, leaning against Grace's incubator, and finally let myself sob. They weren't just tears of grief or fear. They were tears of a terrible, painful birth. The birth of the woman I was going to have to become. I knew then that this fight was too big for me to face alone. I needed help. I needed the one other person in the world who loved Lily as much as I did. I needed to call Jake. Finding the courage to call Jake was one of the hardest things I've ever had to do. I sat in the hospital cafeteria, a cold, untouched cup of coffee in front of me, staring at his name in my phone's contact list. What could I possibly say? How do you tell someone that the woman they loved didn't just die, but that she gave birth, and that the child they should be raising together was nearly murdered by her own family? There were no words for that kind of horror. It felt like trying to describe the sun to someone born in a cave. My hand was shaking as I pressed the call button. It rang once, twice, 3 times. I was about to hang up, my nerve failing me, when he answered. "Hello?" His voice was a wreck. It was thick and raspy, as if he hadn't spoken or slept in days. I could picture him perfectly, alone in the small apartment he and Lily had dreamed of fixing up together, surrounded by her half-finished paintings and the ghost of her laughter. "Jake," I said, my own voice cracking. "It's Chloe." There was a long pause. I could hear his sharp intake of breath. "Chloe, hey, I'm sorry about the funeral. I couldn't be there." "I know, Jake. No one expected you to be," I said softly. "Listen, something has happened. Something you need to know. It's about Lily." "What is it?" he asked, a new edge of panic in his voice. "Did they find something out about what happened?" "In a way," I said, struggling to form the sentence. "Jake, Lily, she had the baby. The baby is alive." The silence on the other end of the line was absolute. It was so complete I thought the call had dropped. I could hear nothing, not even his breathing. It was the sound of a world stopping on its axis. "Jake?" I whispered into the phone. "Are you there?" Then I heard it. A sound, a strangled, broken noise that was half sob, half gasp for air. It was the sound of a heart breaking and being put back together all at the same time. "What?" he finally choked out. "What are you saying?" "That's not possible. They said there were complications. They said they lied, Jake," I said, the words coming out in a rush now. "They lied about everything. She had the baby. It's a girl. And she's here. She's at St. Vincent's Hospital. She's alive." I heard a clatter like he had dropped the phone. Then more sobs, raw and unrestrained. He was weeping, the kind of deep, gut-wrenching weeping a man tries to hide from the world. I just stayed on the line, listening, letting him grieve and hope and feel all the impossible things he was feeling. "Where are you?" he finally managed to ask, his voice wrecked. I'm coming right now." He arrived less than an hour later. I met him by the main entrance. He looked like a ghost. He was pale, his eyes were red and swollen, and he hadn't shaved in days. He wore a faded t-shirt and jeans, the same kind of clothes my father despised, and I had never been so happy to see anyone in my life. He was real. He was honest. He was everything my father wasn't. He just stared at me, his eyes filled with a million questions. "Is it true?" he whispered. I nodded, my own eyes filling with tears. "It's true. Come on." I led him through the maze of hospital corridors to the NICU. I had to explain the rules. Wash your hands, no coats, be quiet. He did everything I said, moving like a man in a dream. When we stood in front of her incubator, he froze. He just stared. He looked at her tiny face, her perfect little hands, the wisp of dark hair on her head. He was so still, so silent. I could feel the tremor that ran through his body. He was afraid to believe it, afraid that if he blinked, she would be gone. Slowly, as if moving through deep water, he reached out and laid his hand flat against the clear plastic of the incubator, right above her tiny body. He didn't touch her, but his hand was a shield, a promise. "She looks like her," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. His knees buckled, and he would have fallen if I hadn't been there to catch his arm. He leaned against the incubator for support, his shoulders shaking with silent sobs. "She has her mouth. Lily's mouth." We stood there for a long time, two broken people held together by the sight of this tiny, miraculous child. When he finally composed himself, he turned to me, his eyes blazing with a new fire. The grief was still there, but now there was something else. A fierce, protective anger. "What happened, Chloe?" he asked, his voice low and dangerous. "Tell me everything." So I did. We sat in that same miserable cafeteria, and I told him the whole story. I told him about my father's words. "We'll fix this quietly." I told him about the funeral, the walk to the river, the box, the cry. I told him everything, leaving out no ugly detail. He listened without interrupting, his hands clenched into tight fists on the table. The color drained from his face, leaving it a mask of pale fury. When I was finished, he was silent for a full minute, just staring at the tabletop. "He tried to kill her," he finally said, the words flat and dead. "He tried to kill my daughter." "Yes," I said. "And your mother just stood there?" "Yes." He looked up at me and his eyes were clear. The shock was gone, replaced by a cold, hard resolve. "Okay," he said. "Okay, what do we do now?" That was the moment we became a team. The hospital had already assigned a social worker to Grace's case, a kind but firm woman named Mrs. Davis. She had been trying to get answers from me, and now I could finally give them to her. With Jake by my side, I told her the true story. Her professional composure slipped as she listened, her eyes widening in horror. She was the one who put us in touch with a legal aid lawyer, a young, smart woman named Sarah who specialized in family law and child protection. Sarah met with us that afternoon in a small, windowless office in the hospital. She listened to our story, her expression growing grimmer with every word. "This is attempted murder and child endangerment at the very least," she said, her voice sharp. "But our first priority isn't criminal charges. It's securing Grace's safety. We need to file for emergency guardianship immediately." For the next 2 days, that's what we did. We holed up in that small office, fueled by bad coffee and a burning sense of purpose. We began to build our wall of proof. Jake had to get a DNA test to formally prove his paternity. He had saved letters and text messages from Lily, where she talked excitedly about the baby, about their future, about their plans to name her if she was a girl. Her first choice had been Grace. Hearing that felt like a sign, a blessing from Lily herself. My job was harder. I had to write an affidavit. I had to write down, in cold legal language, exactly what my father did. I had to describe the box, the river, the cry, the hospital bracelet. Every word was like swallowing broken glass. I was officially betraying my family. I was putting my father's monstrous act on public record, but with every sentence I typed, I felt a layer of fear and silence shedding from me. It was a quiet revenge, not one of shouting or violence, but of meticulous, undeniable truth. Jake and I were a strange pair, the grieving mechanic and the renegade teacher. We barely slept. We took turns sitting by Grace's incubator, whispering to her, telling her stories about her mom. We supported each other through waves of grief and bursts of anger. We were two strangers, bound together by the woman we had both loved, and the child she had left behind. Every form we signed, every piece of evidence we gathered, was a brick in the wall we were building around Grace. It was a wall my father, with all his money and all his power, would not be able to break through. We weren't just fighting for custody. We were fighting for Lily's memory. We were fighting for the truth. The day we went to court felt like walking into another world. The family courtroom was a sterile, formal place, all polished wood and hushed tones. It was a universe away from the raw emotion of the NICU, with its beeping machines and whispered hopes. The air was heavy with the weight of broken families and difficult decisions. Jake and I sat on one side of the room with our lawyer, Sarah. I wore the most conservative dress I owned, trying to look like the responsible, stable teacher I was. Jake wore a borrowed suit that was a little too tight in the shoulders. He looked uncomfortable and out of place, but his jaw was set with a grim determination. We were a small, scrappy team, armed with nothing but the truth. On the other side of the courtroom sat my parents and their lawyer. My father looked powerful and confident in his perfectly tailored gray suit. He nodded at acquaintances in the room, projecting an aura of calm authority. My mother sat beside him, a fragile, elegant statue in black. She looked straight ahead, her face pale and drawn, clutching a Chanel handbag in her lap like a life raft. Their lawyer was exactly the kind of man I expected my father to hire. Older, with silver hair and a smooth, confident voice that oozed expensive charm. The hearing began. Our lawyer, Sarah, presented our case first. She laid out the facts simply and clearly, telling the story of Grace's birth, abandonment, and rescue. She presented Jake's positive DNA test, his letters from Lily, and my sworn affidavit. Her voice was calm and steady, but the facts themselves were a bombshell in the quiet courtroom. Then my father's lawyer stood up. His name was Mr. Davenport, and he was good. He was a master storyteller. He didn't dispute the basic facts. Instead, he tried to repaint them. He spoke of the immense grief and shock my family had experienced, the sudden tragic loss of a beloved daughter. He described my father as a man broken by sorrow, not thinking clearly, acting in a state of profound psychological distress. This was not an act of malice. Your Honor, Mr. Davenport said, his voice dripping with sympathy. This was a tragic misunderstanding, a terrible, regrettable mistake made in a moment of unimaginable pain. He then tried to paint me as an unreliable narrator. He brought up my own grief, suggesting I was emotionally unstable, hysterical. Miss Reynolds, in her fragile state, has misinterpreted a desperate act of a grieving father, he argued. She has constructed a narrative that, while compelling, is a product of trauma, not reality. When it was my turn to take the stand, my heart was hammering so hard I thought I might be sick. Every eye in the room was on me. I could feel my father's stare like a physical weight. Mr. Davenport was gentle at first, his questions full of feigned concern. But his goal was clear, to make me doubt my own memory, to make me seem like a confused, emotional girl. Miss Reynolds, he said. It was a stormy day, correct? The river was loud. Is it not possible that what you thought was a cry was simply the wind? I looked away from him toward the judge. She was an older woman with sharp, intelligent eyes that seemed to see right through everything. Her name was Judge Alani, and she had a reputation for being tough but fair. No, I said, my voice clearer than I expected. I'm a teacher. I've worked with children for 6 years. I know the difference between the wind and a baby crying. And you're certain about what you saw your father do? He pressed. In your grief? In the pouring rain? Could you have been mistaken about his intentions? I thought of Grace in her incubator. I thought of Lily. I looked directly at my father. He knelt down. He unwrapped a cloth from a wooden box. He placed the box in the river. I am not mistaken about what I saw. My simple, direct answers seemed to frustrate him. My story didn't have holes because it was the truth. There was nothing to embellish or forget. The turning point came when the judge started asking questions herself. She leaned forward, her gaze sharp and focused. She addressed my father's lawyer. Mr. Davenport, your client claims this was a misunderstanding, she said, her voice cutting through the courtroom's polite facade. Help me understand. A misunderstanding doesn't end with a newborn baby in a river. So what exactly was misunderstood? Mr. Davenport faltered for a moment. Your Honor, my client believed the box contained mementos of his daughter. In his grief, he felt compelled to return them to nature. Judge Alani's eyebrow shot up. Mementos that cry? The courtroom was silent. Then she called my father to the stand. He walked up with his usual confidence, but I could see a fine sheen of sweat on his forehead. He tried to project the same story of the grieving, confused father. Mr. Reynolds, the judge said, her voice like ice, you run a multi-million-dollar construction empire. You are known for your attention to detail. Are you telling this court that you, a man of such precision, did not know you were holding a living child in your hands? My father's composure began to fray at the edges. I was distraught. I wasn't thinking clearly. We panicked. Judge Alani leaned forward even further, her eyes locking onto his. You panicked, she repeated, her voice dripping with disbelief. Let me be clear, Mr. Reynolds. Did you panic because you were worried about the health and safety of your newborn grandchild? Or did you panic because you were worried about the scandal she would bring to your family's good name? That was the question that broke him. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. The lie was too big to tell, and the truth was too monstrous to admit. In his silence, the entire courtroom heard the answer. His carefully constructed mask of the grieving patriarch crumbled into dust, exposing the cold, selfish man underneath. He was no longer Thomas Reynolds, the powerful empire builder. He was just a man who had tried to drown a baby to protect his reputation. The judge's ruling was swift and merciless. This court has heard a great deal about grief and confusion today, she said, her voice ringing with authority. But what it has seen is a calculated, callous act of child endangerment, motivated by pride and fear of social shame. There is no confusion here. There is only cruelty. She looked from my father to me and Jake. Emergency custody of the child, Grace Reynolds Harper, is hereby granted to her biological father, Mr. Jake Harper, and her maternal aunt, Ms. Chloe Reynolds. A permanent hearing will be scheduled, but for now, this child's safety is paramount. She is to have no contact with her maternal grandparents. A collective gasp went through the room. My father sat down heavily, his face ashen. For the first time in my life, I saw him look truly defeated. I let out a breath I didn't know I had been holding. Jake reached over and squeezed my hand, his own eyes shining with tears of relief. We had won. The truth had won. As we were getting up to leave, I caught my mother's eye from across the courtroom. Her face was streaked with tears. Real tears this time, not the performative kind. The mask was gone from her face, too. All that was left was a broken woman. She looked at me, and her lips formed two silent words. I'm sorry. It wasn't enough. It would never be enough to erase her silence, her complicity. But it was the first crack in the wall of lies that had defined our family for my entire life. I gave her a small, almost imperceptible nod. It wasn't forgiveness. It was just acknowledgement. And for now, it was a start. The months that followed the court hearing were a strange mixture of chaos and peace. Jake and I, along with baby Grace, moved into a small, two-bedroom apartment on the other side of town. It was nothing like the grand, silent house I had grown up in. It was small and a little bit shabby, with walls that needed a fresh coat of paint and floors that creaked. But it was filled with life. It was filled with the sound of Grace's gurgles, which soon turned into laughter. It was filled with the smell of baby powder and Jake's late-night attempts at cooking. It was a home. We built a new kind of family, the three of us. Our lives became a routine of 2 a.m. feedings, diaper changes, and endless loads of laundry. Jake went back to work at the garage, his hands still covered in grease, but now when he came home, his face would light up the moment he saw Grace. He would scoop her out of her crib, and she would pull at his beard and laugh, and the deep sadness in his eyes would recede, just for a little while. He was a natural father, full of patience and a deep, quiet love that was beautiful to watch. He was giving Grace the life he and Lily had dreamed of. I went back to teaching. My life was divided between my first graders and my niece. I would come home, exhausted from a day of spelling words and playground disputes, and the moment I held Grace in my arms, the exhaustion would melt away. She was my anchor. She was the living, breathing proof that I had done the right thing. In saving her, I had saved myself. I was no longer the quiet, invisible daughter. I was Chloe, Grace's aunt, her guardian. I had a voice, and I had used it. The legal battle with my father dragged on in the background. He appealed the judge's decision, of course. His lawyers tried to paint us as unfit guardians, a greasy mechanic and an emotional schoolteacher. But the facts were too strong. His reputation in the town was shattered. The story had leaked, as stories always do. It was whispered about at the country club and in the grocery store aisles. He was no longer the respected king of the town. He was the man who had tried to drown his own grandchild. The appeals failed. We were granted permanent custody. He had lost. My mother was the first to try and cross the chasm between our two worlds. She called me about 2 months after the hearing. Her voice was small and hesitant. Chloe, I was wondering if I could see her. I was torn. My anger at her was still a raw, open wound. Her silence had been a betrayal just as deep as my father's actions. But I heard the desperate loneliness in her voice. And I knew that Grace deserved to have a grandmother, if that grandmother could learn to be a real one. Okay, Mom, I said. You can come over. But Dad is not welcome here. Her first visit was painfully awkward. She arrived bearing gifts. A ridiculously expensive stroller, and a pile of designer baby clothes that were completely impractical for a baby who mostly spit up. It was her old way of communicating, through money and things. She didn't know what to say, so she just stood in our small living room looking lost. I took Grace from her playpen and held her out to my mother. Would you like to hold her? My mother's hands trembled as she took her. She held Grace stiffly at first, as if she were made of glass. But then Grace cooed and reached up with a tiny hand to touch my mother's pearl necklace. A real, genuine smile broke through my mother's carefully composed face. A tear rolled down her cheek and dripped onto Grace's blanket. She looks like Lily, she whispered. I know, I said. She started visiting every week after that. The visits were quiet. We didn't talk about my father. We didn't talk about what happened at the river. We talked about Grace. We talked about her first smile, the way she loved mashed bananas, the new tooth that was coming in. We talked about Lily, telling Grace stories about the mother she would never know. Slowly, tentatively, my mother started to become a grandmother. She was shedding the skin of Catherine Reynolds, the perfect society wife, and becoming just a woman who loved her grandchild. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was a fragile kind of peace. My father stayed away for a long time. Then, one Saturday afternoon, almost a year after the funeral, there was a knock on our apartment door. I opened it and he was standing there. He looked smaller. The towering, intimidating figure from my childhood was gone. He looked older, tired. The expensive suit couldn't hide the slump in his shoulders or the deep lines of strain around his eyes. He wasn't holding a briefcase. His hands were empty. Chloe, he said. His voice was quiet, stripped of its usual booming authority. "What do you want?" I asked. I didn't invite him in. He didn't try to push past me. He just stood on the welcome mat. "I started a fund," he said, looking at a spot on the wall behind me. "At the community bank. It's a charitable foundation for single mothers, for young women who don't have support." I named it the Lily Reynolds Foundation. I stared at him, stunned into silence. Of all the things I expected him to say, that wasn't one of them. It was a classic Thomas Reynolds move, solving a problem with money, but this felt different. "Why?" I finally asked. It was the only word I could think of. It wasn't a question about the foundation's logistics. It was a question about his soul. He finally met my eyes. The coldness was gone. In its place was something that looked like shame, a deep, hollowed-out shame. "Because I can't undo what I did," he said, his voice raspy. "I know that, but I can try to make sure it never happens to another girl. No other girl should be so scared and alone that she ends up, that her family thinks—" He couldn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. He reached into his jacket and pulled out an envelope. "This is for Grace, a trust. For her education. For her future. You and Jake are the trustees. I will have no control over it." He held it out to me. I didn't take it. "We don't need your money," I said. "I know," he said, placing the envelope on the small table by the door. "This isn't for you. It's for her. And it's for me." It was the closest he would ever come to an apology. It was his penance. I didn't say thank you. I didn't yell at him. I didn't forgive him. The damage he had done was too deep for that, but the burning rage inside me had cooled to embers. He was no longer the monster who haunted my nightmares. He was just a sad, broken old man who had destroyed his own life in a desperate attempt to control it. "Goodbye, Dad," I said, and quietly closed the door. I had taken my power back. He no longer had any hold on me. On the first warm day of spring, a year to the day that we buried Lily, we went back to the river. The world was completely different. The sky wasn't a bruised gray. It was a bright, cloudless blue. The trees that had been bare and skeletal were now covered in soft green leaves. The river itself, which had been a churning, muddy torrent of death, was now calm and clear, sparkling in the sunlight. It was just the four of us. Jake held Grace on his hip. At 1 year old, she was a bundle of energy, pointing at a butterfly with a chubby finger and babbling with delight. Her dark hair was pulled into a tiny ponytail, and she wore a bright yellow dress. She was life itself. My mom was with us, a small, quiet presence by my side. She carried a large bouquet of white lilies, my sister's favorite. We walked to the spot on the bank where I had pulled the box from the reeds. The memory was still there, a ghost image in the back of my mind, but it no longer had the power to paralyze me. It was just a story now, a part of my past. My mother knelt down and one by one placed the lilies into the water. We watched as the current gently pulled them, carrying them downstream like small white boats. It was a silent, beautiful tribute. Then it was my turn. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a small piece of wood I had been whittling for weeks. It was a simple, smooth wooden heart, and I had carefully carved Lily's initials into it. It was my own memento, something made of love to replace the memory of that other, terrible wooden box. I held it in my palm for a moment, then leaned down and let it go. It floated for a second, then joined the lilies on their journey down the river. "You're safe now, Lily," I whispered to the water, to the wind, to wherever she was. And so is she. We stood there for a long time, watching the river move on, carrying both our grief and our hope. The river had taken so much, but it had also given me grace. It was the scene of the crime, but it was also the scene of the rescue. I realized then that the river wasn't evil. It was just a force of nature, constantly moving, constantly changing, always flowing forward. Just like life. I looked at Jake and he smiled at me. A real, genuine smile that reached his eyes. I looked at my mom, who was watching Grace with a look of pure, uncomplicated love. And I looked at Grace, my niece, my daughter, in every way that mattered, who was now reaching for my hand. I understood what forgiveness really was. It wasn't a magic wand you waved to make all the pain disappear. It wasn't about forgetting what happened or pretending it wasn't a monstrous betrayal. Forgiveness isn't for the other person, it's for you. It's choosing not to let the past keep its hooks in you. It's choosing not to let their actions drown you. Again and again, every single day. If this story hit your heart, please like, subscribe, and drop a comment to tell me where you're watching from. Because sometimes the bravest thing you can do isn't shouting for justice or seeking revenge. Sometimes the bravest thing in the world is finding the one small thing that is still breathing in the wreckage and dedicating your life to helping it grow.